Equestrian Canada came out with the coach status a few years ago, or started working on it a few years ago and came out with it last year, was the Government of Canada mandate to address harassment, abuse, and discrimination in sport. We've all heard a lot of stories and horror stories from other sports, and even within our sport in other places. The Minister of Sport at the time, Christy Duncan, held a meeting in Red Deer called the Red Deer I think it was Safe Sport meeting, where they declared that the federal minister can now withhold funding from any sport organization that doesn't fulfill certain requirements that relate to safe sport. Click again, Monica. So all sports have to take any necessary measures to create a workplace free from harassment, abuse, and discrimination of any kind. Click again. Immediately disclose any incident of harassment, abuse, or discrimination that could compromise projects or programming, and make provisions within their governance framework to access an independent third party to address those harassment and abuse cases. So really it was about forcing sports, or getting all sports to come to the same starting point where they had safe sport policies that protected athletes and protected coaches, and protected those who work at competition or those who work for the equestrian federations, and giving them access to an unbiased independent third party to address any issues that come up. So those were all put in place in 2018. In 2019, EC came up with a new series of safe sport policies. And these are all posted on the Equestrian Canada website. They were rolled out, the board approved them in stages in March and September of 2019. There wasn't a lot of announcement that went out about these, so you may have seen them, you may not. Some of the policies that came out, and there's a whole series of them, but the ones that really affect coaches include the abuse policy for individuals, athlete protection guidelines, the code of conduct and ethics, which has been aligned to the universal code of conduct for coaches. So we're now following universal sports standard for codes of conduct and ethics. How to resolve any corrective action during events, new concussion policy and concussion code of conduct, which is updated internationally every 7 years. So EC is now trying to update their policies to reflect any changes in the return to sport, in the language that's being used, and in the policies around concussion. A discipline, complaints, and appeals policy, a screening policy, and a whistleblower policy. And if you're used to the policies that EC used to have, it was sort of one great big pile. They've been separated out into more, I guess, more individual packages. Like they're easier for people to find exactly the policy they're looking for. And I would encourage you, if you're wondering about them, to go and have a look at the policies. None of them are enormous, so they don't take too long to get through, but they really do sort of explain the different things that have changed in the system, and probably some of the rule changes that you've seen as well. Next slide. So the other thing that was put into place because of the Red Deer Accord was EC created a third-party complaint management system. So in July of 2019, they hired a group called W&W Dispute Resolution Services, which is a lawyer named Brian Ward. I think he's based in Ottawa. And he works independently of Equestrian Canada. And if you go to the Safe Sport page of Equestrian Canada, if anybody has a complaint about a different member, any complaint that's entered there goes directly to Brian. It doesn't go to anybody on EC staff, and EC is only involved when there might be information that is needed from the staff. So verifying that a membership is active, verifying that a coach has an active license, that sort of thing. But they're not involved in any of the investigation or any of the resolution until there's a determination from Brian. So he handles that all independently, and he does do it for a couple of different sports. He is a multi-sport lawyer, so he's worked with several different sports. So he's not an equestrian with any bias. He doesn't actually ride a horse, and he's not out in the field. Next slide. So in the screening policy, there's a new set of screening requirements that are really defined in the policy. And in the past, our certified coaches had some screening requirements as part of certification. That's all been pulled out of keeping your certification active. So if you are a certified coach, keeping your certification active with the NCCP just means you're doing professional development to keep that coach certification updated. If you're not certified, or if you're looking for an EC status, whether you're certified or not, you basically fall into two different screening policies or two different screening categories. So click again, Monica. So we've got a large portion of our coaches fall into that level 2 or medium risk category. And those are our coaches who are maybe working under supervision, who are not working alone, who are not the head coach in a facility, are not responsible for making those decisions every day about who's riding what horse, what the training plan is, maybe what the competition plan for the season is. Those are more of our junior coaches or our second coaches in command, that kind of thing. And to be screened according to the screening policy, they'll have to complete an application form. And this is directly applied to the status. So they're creating an application form. They're filling in a screening disclosure form, which is basically you telling EC whether you've done anything that might show up on a police check or anything that might cause somebody to give you a bad reference. They're participating in some training and orientation. They're completing an EPIC criminal record check, which is your basic Sterling back check. It can be done online. They're doing a letter of reference, might be asked for a driver's abstract, although as far as I know, nobody ever has. And they don't require a vulnerable sector search. So those are most of our coaches, most instructors would fall into that. Anybody who's not certified or any certified coach who doesn't need the license status can fall into that second level of screening. And we'll go through all of this again further through the presentation as well. So click again, Monica. Our certified coaches or our head coaches, our team coaches, those who are, really working with vulnerable minors more in a position of authority, those are our coaches who are going to need to do a little bit more for their screening. And this is really where we've applied, or where EC's applied level 3 screening to those coaches holding the license status. And those coaches will have to complete an application, do the screening disclosure, participate in trainings, do an EPIC background check. They'll need 2 letters of reference once when they apply. And then they will need to do a vulnerable sector search. And a vulnerable sector search is just a more in-depth police search that's done. It checks some closed databases that can't be checked in the EPIC. Generally has to be done in person. It only has to be done once for the level 3. It only has to be done once in your lifetime. So it's an extra step the first time you apply, but once you've got your status, you don't need to apply for that search again. Next slide. So EC took all of that information. I'm sure you all heard about the coach license in 2019 when it was announced at the Royal, and it had all sorts of different levels and different statuses and different discounts for different things. And there was a lot of feedback that came in that basically led EC to believe that probably wasn't the cleanest way to start rolling out a program like this. And then the pandemic hit and gave them some time to go back and to really go through what they needed coaches to do to make sure everybody's creating that safe environment, and then how simply that could be offered. So they came back with the coach status program, which has 2 levels or 2 products, the registered coach status and the coach license or the licensed coach status. And both of those are designations that certified coaches can get. If you're an uncertified coach and you're looking to become a coach status holder with EC and be recognized, then you'd need that registered coach status. So it's a designation for self-declared coaches to be recognized by EC. They're meeting those level 2 minimum screening standards. They're doing some safe sport training. They're providing proof of valid insurance, and that status will be valid for the calendar year until the end of December 31st of the year that you purchase it in. So if you think about in the past, our certified coaches had to pay the coach levy and had to do all of those screening and training things in the background to keep their coach status active. This is basically the same thing. It's a levy that's been added on to your sport license. And now it's opened up to uncertified coaches as well. The reason being, there are about 2,000 active certified coaches in Canada. There are between 8,000 and 10,000, it's estimated, equestrian coaches working on our fields of play in Canada, and probably a lot more than that never appear at competition. So really what the goal here is trying to get everybody who's introducing people to equestrian sport to have a minimum standard of screening, training, and insurance. The coach license is for coaches with verified experience or certified coaches. So either you've been certified by EC, you've been certified by another national federation, and we'll look at the list in a minute, and you've done more stringent safety or ethical standards, and you could be uncertified, but with a lot of experience. So it's sort of a way to move those professional coaches who never got certified, but have been out there actively working in the sport with a license they can move into that still provides them the same screening, training, and make sure they have the right insurance. And the license is a little different. It's valid for 365 days from the date it's issued. If you're certified, the cost of the coach license status goes down 15% because you've already gotten certified in the program, so you've done one of the big steps. Next slide. So if we look at coaches in the past, so in 2020, there were really two types of coaches that EC dealt with. There were uncertified coaches, and this is to sort of show the level of risk that EC has with these coaches. So uncertified coaches may hold a sport license with EC. They might hold a PTSO membership, but there wasn't really any way of knowing because they weren't identified. They didn't have any safe sport training, they hadn't done any screening, and no one knew if they had any insurance. So it represented this large group that really were creating risk in the sport, because not that we knew they were, or EC knew they were doing things that maybe weren't right, but that EC didn't know because they couldn't identify those people. And then there were the EC and CCP certified coaches who paid the coach levy. They did have a sport license. They had signed a code of conduct at some point. And if you're like me, I got certified in 1992. So my code of conduct's probably pretty old if it still exists somewhere. They had done some of the safe sport training that's required now. They've done making ethical decisions and a first aid, and they've done pretty much the level 1 screening that's now in that screening policy. And we still didn't know if they had any insurance to make sure that everybody in their environment was safe. Click again, Monica. So if we look forward to what's being offered in 2021, click again, there are the two statuses, the EC registered coach status, which will verify that every coach has a sport license. And to have a sport license, you need to have your provincial membership. You will have accepted the EC code of conduct and those policies. You've done some safe sport training. You're screened at the level 2 level from those screening policies, and your insurance is being verified. For anybody who buys into the coach license, you're holding an EC sport license and that provincial membership. You've accepted the codes of conduct and policies. You're safe sport trained. You're certified or experienced. You're screened at that highest level, the level 3 level. Your insurance has been verified, and you have access to some legal counsel and support services. Next slide. So the requirements to hold a coach status. For the registered coach status, 16 years or the provincial minimum. If you're not from Alberta, that must be the age, 16 years. For the coach license, it's age of majority. So whatever the age of majority is in the province that you're residing in. So if some provinces are 18, some are 19. You must hold a valid EC sport license. And there's a few reasons for this. Eventually, the coach status or the coach license will be separated from the sport license. For the interim, they decided to attach it to the sport license because it was the easiest way to get this rolling. Everybody's used to getting their sport license. There is no minimum anymore for what sport license you need to hold for different levels of certification. So if you're coming into this as a certified competition coach specialist, you had to have a silver sport license last year. This year you can hold a bronze. Even a high performance coach can hold a bronze if they're not using that sport license for anything else. So if you're using that sport license to compete, to be an owner, to do anything else in the sport, to be an official, then you'll need to keep that level for those things. For the registered and licensed coach status, there's no minimum. So I'm a licensed coach with a bronze sport license because I'm not competitive in the sport. You will have to do that mandatory safe sport training. There are a couple of options. So there's fostering healthy environments, which is really that safe sport abuse and harassment training. And we'll talk about the alternatives to that as well. You'll have to do some concussion awareness training and complete some first aid. For the registered coach, the standard is an emergency first aid, which is a one-day first aid, which is very basic, takes you through all sorts of injuries that can happen from falls and splinting, stuff like that. The emergency first aid is similar to what our certified coaches have had to do in the past. If you've ever done that Pro First online, that's no longer enough for our registered or licensed coaches. Licensed coaches have to do a 2-day first aid, which is an in-person, in a classroom first aid. There are some national providers of first aid that are offering a blended version of that standard first aid where you do 1 day in a classroom, 1 day online. And we can talk a little bit about first aid certificates as well, because of the pandemic, if you had a first aid certificate that expired in 2020, you can submit that as your first aid for 2021, because there's the understanding that we can't all go and work in a classroom in a lot of places. Some places are allowing it, some aren't. So if you're certified and your first aid expired last year, you can use that for 2021, and then you'll have to update by 2022. And you can use that emergency first aid for 2021 if you have to for the coach license if you don't have access to that standard first aid. If you work in a medical field, so you're a paramedic or an emergency room nurse, and you already have that training as part of your employment, you just need a letter stating that you've already covered the things that would be in that first aid, and you submit that as your first aid. Coach certification, to be a registered coach, you don't have to be, you can be. Registered coaches do not have to buy the license. They can buy the registered status. It's really their choice. If you want the coach license, you either have to be certified or have 10 years or more experience. And that's a step that's proven through the application process. You will need to provide proof of insurance, so $2 million commercial general liability and $100,000 professional liability. Those are standard in our sport and in our country for what's acceptable, and Mike King will talk about those in a few minutes, I'm sure, so I won't steal his thunder. And then the screening, as we talked about, those registered coaches will complete level 2 screening. Those licensed coaches will complete level 3, and they'll all acknowledge all those EC policies as they go through the process of applying. Next slide. So there are several certifications that are recognized for the coach license. If you're looking for the coach license, if you think that's the right place for you, if you have an EC NCCP certification, that qualifies. If you've got your Pony Club A, that qualifies. Certified Horsemanship Association level 2 or higher qualifies. IGEQ recognized certification is the International Trainer's Passport. So IGEQ is the international group for equestrian qualifications. And what they've done is they have compared all National Federation Equestrian Coach Certification programs and created a matrix. So if I go to Britain and I do my British Horse Society Assistant Instructor, then with my international trainer's passport, I can be recognized in Canada as a level 1 international trainer's passport holder, which is equivalent to a competition coach. The IGEQ passport can be applied for by Canadian coaches as well. If you have an NCCP certification, EC can make you a passport, and it is a little green passport with your picture in it, which you can use to prove certification in other countries. Some countries have had for a long time mandatory certification. You're not allowed to open a facility or teach in some countries without proving that you're certified, so that IGEQ passport works for that. So if you are certified from another country, then you should have a look at whether you can have that certification recognized through the passport program. Cantra certification, provincial vaulting trainer certification, which mostly applies in BC. If you have a post-secondary education in equine or coaching related fields, so some universities are starting to offer advanced coaching diplomas. If you've done one of those, that can qualify you as being certified. Or if you have 10 or more years of coaching experience with enhanced screening. So they will ask more questions, get you to complete a bit more of an application just to prove that you've got that experience. Next slide. So the benefits of using of having the coach status. So the benefits right now, I'm sure you've all looked at this and you've all gone, well, that's not much more than we had before. And this is a program that's going to build over the next 5 or 6 years, hopefully. So it's true, there are not a lot of benefits yet, I'll be honest. There is the use of a badge that you can put on your website, that registered or licensed coach, to show parents, to show athletes, to show people coming to the property that you've done all of those screening and training pieces and proven insurance, so they know you're creating that, so you're doing your best to create that safe environment. A listing on the Find a Coach map, which if you've had a look for it this year, since the end of January, it's quite different. It is an actual interactive map now. It's a basic listing for registered coaches, and licensed coaches can go in and add as much information as they like and really make it sort of a landing page to attract more business. Your EPIC background check, which is it's your enhanced police information check that has to be done every 3 years for the coach status. Those back checks can be done online through Sterling Back Check, and they are now free if you're a coach status holder. So once you've got your coach status, you'll be sent a link for a page that you can go to and complete that back check for free every 3 years. Everybody's got access to that third-party complaint management, Brian Ward, through the Safe Sport page of the EC site. There is some abuse defense coverage for licensed coaches only that Mike's going to talk about. There are some training discounts. When you hold a status, you'll get discounts on some of the e-learning courses that are starting to come out in the campus. There's quite a few. There's Conditioning the Sport Horse, which was done by Hillary Clayton and a few of us, and is I think a really good course if you're looking for that sort of information. There's a few other EC courses in there. All the access to the Safe Sport training that you have to complete is free through EC. And then you'll have some eligibility to access some EC programs, depending on whether you're a registered coach or a coach license. And we'll talk about which one you need to have the license for in a little bit. Next slide. So for 2021, the requirement for 2021 is that nothing is required. You don't have to have a coach status in 2021 to attend competition. This is sort of a moving into it year, really phasing in, getting everybody used to the idea, getting all of our pieces of paper lined up, completing first aid, completing police checks, all of those things. So for 2021, there are no formal requirements. It's recommended that you get the registered coach status at a minimum. In 2022, at all EC sanctioned competitions, a minimum standard of registered coach will be required. And I get asked a lot how that's going to be verified. You'll probably start seeing people verifying on memberships that you've got that coach status, but you probably won't be seeing people at in-gates checking memberships and looking for badges and cards and that sort of thing. It's meant to be something that we positively move into and not something that we are enforcing on the community that's going to make it more difficult for you to get in the warm-up ring or to do the job that you need to do as coaches. 2023, you will need to have a licensed status to operate, to be in the show ring at a gold and platinum show, and a registered status at silver and bronze shows. By 2024, it'll be licensed status at all EC events or EC competitions. And then by 2025, the licensed coach status will be required everywhere, and you'll be required to have certification to get the licensed coach status at all EC sanctioned events. And the goal here is to try and move our coaching community up to a standard of safe sport, where we feel like EC feels like everybody's creating that safe place for athletes to enter and enjoy our sport. And the reason we're focused on, EC is focused on competition, is because that's the only place that EC actually has rules and governance right now. So this had to be tied a little bit to competition, just because that's the only place that anything could be enforced. Ideally, it doesn't really have much to do with competition, because most coaching doesn't happen on the field of play at a competition. As we all know, 90% of our training happens at home, which is the reason we have to have a first aid certificate, because there isn't an ambulance parked next to our own arena. It's the reason that all of these pieces should be in place. So you're creating that safe environment at home. At competition is where you may see people asking for verification that you're a licensed coach. So on an entry form, it might be something that a steward could ask if there were a ton of people in the warm-up ring and they were concerned that coaches weren't able to do their job because there were too many other people there. Next slide. So for the training that's mandatory, every coach has to do concussion training. Concussion is an issue in our sport. As we well know, it's not actually the sport with the highest level of concussion, but it's definitely up there. So every coach has to prove completion of some concussion training, and that has to be valid every 3 years. So international concussion protocols are updated every 3 or 4 years. So most concussion training is updated to keep pace with that concussion, those changes in policy. So there are two options for completing that concussion training. You can complete the EC Concussion e-learning module, which is in the eCampus and is free, or you can complete the NCCP Making Headway in Sport module, which is in the locker. And if you're a certified coach, you might have done that. If you're not certified, you can open a locker account with CAC for free, and you can do that training through your locker account. And then it's recorded on your locker transcript, and it'll be pushed over to the campus as well. So you have to have done one of those two in the past 3 years to tick that box for concussion training. Next slide. The other training that all coaches have to do is harassment and abuse prevention training. It's also valid for 3 years, so you will have to do this every 3 years. I didn't mention the concussion training takes about 90 minutes to do. It has a really good helmet fitting video included in it. It's also equestrian related and walks you through the return to sport policies that EC uses. For harassment and abuse prevention training, there are 3 choices. You can do the EC Fostering Healthy Equestrian Environments e-learning in the eCampus, which is free for every sport license holder or free for status holders. And that training really walks you through all of the safe sport rules around our sport, included in our policies, talks about the Universal Code of Conduct for coaches, talks about how to get help for athletes, parents, families, coaches, if something happens, where to report, who to talk to, that sort of thing. It also takes about 90 minutes and it's free. Or you can do the Coach Association of Canada's Safe Sport e-learning module, which is free through the locker, takes about 90 minutes, and it's a really good multi-sport module of safe sport in sport and how that works. Or if your province has required it, you can submit the Respect in Sport for Activity Leaders e-learning module, and that's been mandated in a few provinces. So if you've had to do that within the last 3 years, you can submit that as your course as well. Coaches have to repeat these courses every 3 years. The Making Ethical Decisions course, because this gets asked a lot, Making Ethical Decisions online evaluation is part of certification. So it doesn't apply to the status. So you don't have to do that to get your coach status. Next slide. So I am going to pass it over to Mike King, and Mike's going to walk us through all the legal and insurance parts. You're muted, Mike.
No, I'm not.
Okay.
Quick flick. Geez, give me a second, Helen. Hi, everybody. So to Helen's point, my job today is to try and help people understand what the insurance components are that are both included in the coach license status, which is limited to this legal counsel and support, and some abuse coverage, and then later in the presentation to talk about what the other requirements are in terms of insurance information that EC must have in order to complete the application process for your license or registered status to be complete. So let's focus on this legal counsel and support service. Licensed coaches will receive automatically, as part of their license fee that is paid to EC, some coverage for abuse allegations that potentially could be brought against them. And to Helen's point made much earlier in the presentation, we all know that there have been abuse allegations of all manner and all types in sport for many years. They're becoming very much a part of the public conversation. And our sport is not impenetrable to this. And whether it's spoken about in open air or not, we know that it exists. And we should discuss just briefly that abuse is not just about physical abuse, although that's very much a part of it. But there's harassment issues that are probably much more prevalent, that are considered abusive behavior, that can lead to allegations. And frankly, in these days of social Facebook and all the rest of it, abuse allegations have a tendency to come forward perhaps a little bit more and are talked about widely in the community, or can be. And when an allegation is made against a coach, it can be devastating. Whether it's true or not is not really the topic of discussion today. It's really about that allegation having been made, and then what the response should be to the allegation and how that response is made. So the intent of this legal counsel and support service is in part to do exactly that, to respond to those allegations, to define the process by which an allegation can move forward through a complaint protocol, whether or not legal counsel is involved in the conversation, and how they engage in the response for or on behalf of the coach. Those are very important elements. And obviously they come at a cost. And this is the point of having an insurance policy that will help with those costs. The limit is only $25,000. So this was never intended to be a catch-all where someone made a catastrophic sort of claim for abuse, and the allegation was a monetary claim of millions of dollars. This policy, or any policy like it, would not have any chance of responding to that. This is intended to provide sufficient coverage for the process to be made clear to the coach, to help define what that process might look like in defense. And if it is a very small sort of indemnity that might be demanded of the coach, to respond to that. So there is a $25,000 limit on that per occurrence, or a $50,000 aggregate for individual coach per policy year. It helps to protect EC. It helps to protect the coach. It helps to protect the sport. So there's lots of value in this. But beyond that sort of $25,000 piece, there's also a legal helpline that is not limited to cost. It will help in terms of abuse allegations that might be made against a coach, but it can also be used as a resource for legal counsel on a variety of issues. It's free. There's no deductible. There's all kinds of services. There's a 1-800 number, quite literally, that the coaches will have access to, or have access to now, those that have already acquired the license. And there are lawyers on the other end of the phone. They're not paralegals, they're real lawyers. And they're versed on a variety of legal matters. They could assist with questions regarding contract law or employment law. What they won't do, and I've been told this quite clearly by the insurer, is they won't give you a waiver or sort of, they won't give you a form for a boarding agreement, but they'll certainly talk to you about what content should be in those sorts of legal documents, it's a very valuable resource. And again, there's no limitation on how often you call them. The DAS legal service has been around for some time, and they're quite well equipped to manage this. What's important in the last couple of points here on the slide, which everyone's undoubtedly read at this point, that I need to sort of say out loud is that there's no coverage for prior acts. So until that coach license status is achieved, there is no coverage. Meaning to say that if I got my coach license status approved by Equestrian Canada today, and 2 months from now, an allegation came forward based on an incident that occurred last year, there would be no defense provided to me for that previous act, that prior act. So it's very important, sort of from this day forward, as it were. And it's also only for coverage. It's only coverage for legal actions that might be brought in Canada. For those coaches that do travel to the United States or abroad with their students, suffice to say that what that means in real language is that, let's say you're in California horse showing and something happened and a student made an allegation based on an incident in California, but then waited to come home in Canada to launch a legal action, then indeed the policy would respond. Conversely, if they launched a legal action against you in California, then the policy would not respond, if that makes any kind of sense. So that's what this is about. This is embedded, as I said. It was up to EC whether to put it in both the licensed and the registered status. It was determined that it could only be in the licensed status for one reason and one reason only, and that is the registered status coaches can be under the age of majority. They can be 16 years of age. And regrettably, I can't provide a policy of insurance for abuse to someone who is a minor. So that's really why that was delineated. So I'll stop talking about that. I'll come back to another slide when Helen tells me to. Back to you, Helen.
Thanks, Mike. Monica, next slide. Okay, so we had talked a little bit earlier about there's some programs that will require the coach license status. In 2021, to access programs like being an NCCP coach developer, so an evaluator or a learning facilitator who's teaching those classroom classes will need to hold a coach license to coach CET activities. So to be one of the national team coaches, which we all wish we could be, but there's so few of us who get the chance, you'll need to have a coach license. If you're leading a rookie riders program or you're leading a learn to ride program or evaluating students in the Learn to Ride program, you'll need to be a coach license holder. And there is a little caveat to the Rookie Riders and Learn to Ride. You don't just get access to those programs by buying the license. You still have to have had the same training that we've always required our certified coaches to have. So you'd still have to be a certified coach who's had the training in how to evaluate the Rookie Riders, the Learn to Ride program or the training and delivering the Rookie Riders program. Next slide. So to apply for your coach status, it's pretty simple. You log into MyEC, into your regular sport license account. If you have trouble logging in or you can't remember your license number or your password, you can always call memberships and they'll try to help get you logged in. Next slide. Once you log in, you'll either renew your sport license or there's a new tab now right on the first screen for coach status. You can either renew your sport license and you'll be asked partway through the renewal of your sport license if you coach and if you wanted to purchase a coach status. Or you can go straight to the coach status tab and say, yes, I want to purchase one of the coach statuses. There's a little information on that page that tells you about the two statuses. So you choose purchase to select or to go through and actually purchase one of those statuses. Next slide. You're going to select an option, either the registered status or the licensed status. And when you select those options, it'll do a quick check of the EC database and of the campus to see if you've already got some of those pieces fulfilled. More than likely, the first time you do this, you won't have all those pieces completed because you're just applying for the first time. Hopefully next year, there's not very much new to do because everything lasts for a few years. So you should be able to renew more quickly. Once you purchase a coach status, you have 90 days to complete all of the requirements. So you can go through the purchase process right away. And you don't have to have completed all of those submissions until 90 days. If you need more than 90 days, if you can't get to a first aid course because there aren't any being offered because there's another lockdown, if your police check is slow coming back from the police station, then you can apply, you can email coaching@equestrian.ca, and they will extend that 90-day period for you. If you're already a certified coach that EC knows about, they will automatically give you that 15% discount. So if you'd already showed up in the coaching database in the past, then you should show up now. So next slide. You'll have to go, as you go through the application process, you'll review the terms and conditions of holding the status that you've chosen. Next slide. And then you'll get to the checkout phase. You can divert and go to the campus and start completing things before you've paid. It's probably simpler to do all of the checkout once and then go and start working on all of your pieces. When you check out, if you didn't have little green check marks on every item, then your license is placed in a pending status. So it shows that you've applied, but it also shows that there are pieces missing. Then you can go back and you can submit the required documents that are missing. Your application is reviewed by EC staff, and then you'll get an email once they've approved all of those pieces, saying that it's been approved. Really, the only reason it would be rejected is that you didn't complete the pieces in the 90 days or ask for an extension, or there's some sort of issue with a background check, which they would have communicated to you when that background check came in, and you would have been aware of it because you had probably seen that background check and knew there was something going on. First licenses started being issued around January 15th. And I know there are some questions about how long this is taking. It's supposed to be 4 to 5 days to get documents reviewed and verified in the campus. I know personally it's been longer than that. In some cases, quite a bit longer. What I can tell you I've been hearing is that if you have all of your requirements in there, they will approve them relatively quickly and give you that coach status. If you're submitting pieces one at a time and you haven't submitted all of the pieces for your status yet, they may not verify those pieces until all of your pieces are there. There's been a bit of a mass start. So if we think there's 2,000 certified coaches, but there are 8,000 not yet recognized coaches out there, and many have applied for coach status at once, and each has to submit 8, 9, 10 documents for their coach status. That's a lot of verifying to do. So they're a little slow, a little behind in just getting through the backlog of pieces of paper to verify. If you are concerned because you've submitted things and you're not getting a response, you're not getting that approval done, I would email coaching@equestrian.ca and ask why they haven't approved your license or your registered status, because you have completed all of those done. Okay, next slide. Mike, back to you.
Only if she lets me. Oh, there I am. So thank you for unmuting me. It's very good. As part of the application process, as Helen alluded to, there's a lot of paper. And one of the pieces of paper that is required is a certificate of insurance that you would get from your provider. Conceivably, it might be from us, but it might be from other sources. And this is what the certificate looks like. The certificate is actually on the EC website. We as a broker have them already pre-populated, frankly, because we insure so many coaches in Alberta and elsewhere. And effectively, there are two insurance policies that need to be verified as part of this process, one being a commercial general liability insurance policy, which is verifying that you are covered for bodily injury or property damage claims that might be brought against you in your capacity as a coach, that include various clauses that are listed on the certificate, things like cross liability and so on. The minimum limit is $2 million. Many coaches have higher limits than that, so they're overqualified to the extent that the insurance certificate can be completed. The policy needs to cover bodily injury to participants, which may sound like an obvious component, but surprisingly, there are still several insuring companies in the marketplace who provide coverage but don't cover injury in sport-related activity. So it's very important that your insurance broker complete this form so that they can verify all the things that need to be stated in that commercial liability form. There needs to be a separate sort of notation with respect to professional liability. And professional liability is not about bodily injury or property damage. It's about the potential monetary loss that a client might face as a result of your professional service being rendered, advice given, this sort of thing. And we get questioned all the time why this is even part of the insurance process. But to be very frank, in every other sport, professional liability insurance is an automatic coverage, simply because it is in an environment where the coach and the athlete are the coach is relaying advice and giving advice to an athlete that potentially could have implications to their careers. And it's imperative that that professional liability component be embedded. Again, a very low threshold, very low bar to meet. It's only $100,000 of coverage. You can have much higher coverage if your insurance provider already does that for you. So that'll be an easy box to tick on the form. What's important here is that the policy also names your provincial sport organization, in this case Alberta Equestrian Federation, as an additional insured, and Equestrian Canada as an additional insured, which gives them standing in your policy. And there's a reason for that. Partly because EC is actually issuing the license. They're actually giving you a document that says you have met certain criteria to be credentialed in the community. And it's conceivable that if there was a claim brought against you for either commercial general liability or professional liability, that EC and or the PSO, in this case AEF, could be named as co-defendants in the action brought against you because they were party to the issuance of that credential to you. So it's important that your insurer understand that in that environment that I've just described, that your policy will be required to provide a defense for those other two entities, EC and the PSO. It doesn't cost you any money to add them onto the policy. It's simply a defense mechanism that would be triggered only in the event that they were named as a co-defendant. So it's very limited. In any event, the certificate is what EC will accept. What has happened thus far, and I know this certainly from firsthand experience, getting a ton of calls, that folks are sending their coaching documents or coaching policies, their coaching certificates to as issued to Equestrian Canada and saying, well, here's my insurance document, and EC is kicking it back, saying, well, that's not what we want. They need this certificate, this very specific document that is included in that array of documents that are on the EC website, because it has the very specific clauses that need to be verified by your broker separately from the policy that you already have. I want to make one other point, if I may. Many of the programs that we provide in the community, including the membership components in the PSO environment, are all triggered by Jan 1 term. Helen made a point earlier of saying that the registered status is also triggered in a calendar year sort of cycle, where coach license status is a 365-day document. Remember then that if you were to get a coach license status today, March 25th, 2021, that in theory would be valid until March 25th, 2022, that it's only valid if in fact you've met all the criteria as you go past that January 1st threshold. In other words, you have to be a member of your PSO. So you have to have joined in 2022 to keep that coach license status and the insurance that's related to it validated. So there is some management here in terms of time and triggers and all these sorts of things that need to be carefully taken care of by the coach. So I'll be around for questions, but to answer any questions related to the insurance. So I'll put it back to you, Helen.
Thanks, Mike. Monica, next slide. Okay, so coaches are responsible for uploading documents themselves. Your license file remains open for you to add documents until your application is complete and ready to be approved. So some of the documents that you'll need to upload are your valid first aid certificate, standard for those licensed coaches, emergency for registered coaches, that insurance certificate, and there is a template for that. The actual blank fillable certificate is included in the eCampus, so you'll be able to download it, send it to your insurance company, and they'll send it back, and then you upload it into the campus. The screening application form, which is actually the application that you do through MyEC, the screening disclosure form, which is another form that's downloaded from the eCampus. It's a fillable PDF. You fill it in basically saying, since my last police check, I haven't done anything that will show up on the next police check. So it's your opportunity to disclose anything before it gets looked at on that police check sort of randomly. So if there's something in that police check that you know about and you want to explain the circumstance around it before it goes to Brian Ward and he looks at to see what determination they'll make for coaching, you have a chance to fill in that disclosure form and disclose any information for that independent third party to review with your screening checks. Your EPIC criminal record check, which you can do through Sterling Backcheck or you can do at a police station. A vulnerable sector search, which is only required for the license status, and the vulnerable sector search in most places has to be done in person at a police station with 2 pieces of ID. There is a letter you can download from the eCampus for the vulnerable sector search, which will allow you to get the search done. Often that search won't be done if you can't prove that you're working with a vulnerable sector of the society. So they'll require the letter, 2 pieces of ID, and you to show up in person to do that search. And then 1 or 2 letters of reference. So 1 for our registered coach status, 2 for the license. And the letters of reference, there is also a template for those. It's not really a letter, it's a form that you send with some of your contact information and then contact information for a student, a parent, a coworker, a judge you've worked with. There's a list of people who are allowed to fill in that letter of reference, and they basically complete a paragraph on why they think that you're creating a safe environment that's appropriate for the sport. So these all get uploaded yourself into the eCampus. They don't have to be completed before you apply, but they can be if you'd rather apply and have everything done at the same time. Next slide. So to complete that documentation, you're going to go into the eCampus. The only way to get to the eCampus is to go through My EC. So you're going to go to the Equestrian Canada website. You're going to log into your EC account with your sport license number and your password. And on the first page, you're going to see that blue eCampus button. You're going to push the button and it will take you automatically into the eCampus. If you've already registered as with a coach status, the coach license or registered coach, you will see near the top of the page the licenses that you're registered for, and you'll see pathways for those licenses. So you'll see either the coach license or the registered coach, and you can actually view the pathway for either one of those. So you can click on that red view button and it will tell you all of the pieces that are required. That's where you'll be able to download any standard forms that come with those. So the insurance form, the screening disclosure, the letter of reference, pretty much everything has a sample form. So you're not writing essays and creating anything new. If most records were brought over from the locker for coach certification, so if you had completed some of those courses like the Making Headway in Sport, Respect in Sport for Activity Leaders, CAC Safe Sport, those will probably show on your coaching transcript, and you'll already show that you've got the concussion training done or you've already got the Safe Sport training done. If not, you can take a picture of your locker transcript and upload it as proof, or you can enter those EC courses and do them right through the campus. So the Fostering Healthy Equestrian Environments and Concussion Awareness, you can enter. Those are asynchronous e-learning. Same as the CAC courses, you can start and stop as you like. So you start the course, you work at your own pace, you can stop and leave and come back another day. They all take maybe 90 minutes to complete. Once you've completed, that'll automatically show on your transcript. So you've completed that element that's required and it'll be ticked off. Next slide. So what do I have to do for the registered status? This is the list. This is the most important list that you're going to keep seeing. You need your emergency first aid for 3 years. Has to be valid within 3 years of the date that you are applying. An enhanced police information check. That's Sterling Backcheck. That's online. It's valid for 3 years. Proof of insurance with that form you're downloading from the eCampus that Mike talked about. Your screening disclosure form that's downloaded from the eCampus. Every year you'll provide a new one of those and a new proof of insurance. You actually only need one reference letter for the registered status. You can download that template from the eCampus and upload that to your profile one time, the first year you apply. Your concussion training is valid for 3 years, either making headway or EC concussions. Your safe sport training is valid for 3 years, either CAC safe sport, EC fostering healthy equestrian environments, or respect in sport for activity leaders. All of those can be done online, and all of those can be submitted either automatically through doing them through the locker or doing them through the campus. And they have to be valid the day that you've bought the registered status. So if they fall out of validity during that term, like Mike said, then your status will fall out of validity because you haven't got everything up to date. But if you're thinking about the day you apply, they have to be valid for 3 years before today. Next slide. The license status has that level 3 screening. So it requires that standard first aid, which is the 2-day, 1 day in classroom, 1 day online, or 2 days in a classroom. An enhanced police information check, that's the Sterling back check. A vulnerable sector search 1 time, that's done in person at a police station. It's only submitted once in your lifetime because they're checking closed databases that can no longer be updated, and it's actually only required if your birth date is before the end of March 1986, because the youngest person in the closed databases they're checking has a birth date of March 1986. So if you're younger than that, you don't have to do the vulnerable sector search. The system will exempt you from it. Proof of insurance through that form in the eCampus that you download, send your insurer, and they'll send back for you to upload. Screening disclosure form, you're downloading, you're filling it in, you're uploading it. The 2 reference letters that you do once, and there is a criteria at the top of the reference letters for who has to complete them. They don't have to be EC members. They do have to be, they can't be kids. They do have to be people who've reached the age of majority. So parents of kids that you've been teaching, coach developers you've worked with, other coaches, somebody who's going to give you a good reference. You have to have done that concussion training and that safe sport training. Next slide. So if you've done your status, if you've been approved and you want to be listed on the EC Find a Coach, it's a little bit different now. It used to automatically happen. Now in the eCampus, you're going to log into your account through My EC. You're going to go up to the very top right corner of the screen and click on Edit My Profile. And that's where you can see the profile that shows up on the Find a Coach. So you're going to make sure that there's the right directory information in there, the phone number you actually want people to call, the address you actually coach at, putting in your geocode address and making sure that it's showing that you're in the right place and not Timbuktu because your address didn't compute properly, saving it and consenting to having it posted on that Find a Coach search. You can also look in your profile at some of the demographic survey information, review the PD points that are required to keep NCCP certifications up to date, review the terms of use, and then save that Find a Coach profile. Next slide. Next, oh, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to pass it back to Monica, and Monica is going to lead us through a Q&A, and I'm ready for your questions.
Perfect. Thanks, Helen. Actually, let me pass it over to Ashley, who's going to roll through our chat questions. So we noticed that there's a lot of questions from you folks, and we are running a little bit behind time, but we will get to as many of them as we possibly can. Here we go.
And I think some of these questions might have been answered a little bit as we've progressed. But the first question, if you have instructors in training, do they need the membership and registered coach before testing?
Yeah, so a new requirement to get certified with EC is to have your registered status in place before you are evaluated. So we used to require our certified coaches to do all of these pieces as part of certification. Now it's all been pulled back, and the registered status does all the safe sport pieces, and really ensures that everybody's qualified to be working in that realm, and then they're doing their coach evaluation once they've got that registered status.
Perfect. What is a plan, if any, to engage the Western community where most activity is breed or discipline-based? Any foresight?
Wendy, that's a great question, and I haven't talked to you in a while. It's good to hear from you. I don't know what the plan from EC is to engage the Western community. I know one of the things that Mike and I have been talking about as we've done a few of these presentations is the idea that this really wasn't communicated clearly as a cultural change for the community as much as related to competition, because that's where any enforcement might happen. But really the goal is, the story I always tell is, if you've ever been to a dinner party and you've met some new people, somebody always says, what do you do? Oh, I coach kids. I teach kids how to ride horses. Oh, I went on a trail ride once and I got this crazy horse and it bucked me off and I've never ridden again. Horses are scary, or some version of that story. And the goal with this is really to elevate the understanding for parents and for the community that those experiences in our sport shouldn't happen. They should be more protected. They should be a safer first experience, because we know as coaches that if we can get kids into this sport when they're young, the potential for them to stay in the sport compared to other sports like gymnastics and dance and figure skating, they have a much longer longevity in this sport. As we know, most of our national team members are not, they're not young. They've been around a long time. It takes a long time to learn to ride a horse. And what we're really trying to do is create lifelong equestrian sport engagement. So I think that this program is really, it seems very focused on that English competition community right now, because that's where it will initially be enforced. I think the goal is to really start parents and athletes and coaches and other places thinking about, why does our sport not require these things? If I take my kid to a hockey game, I'm not allowed on the ice or behind the bench unless I've done some concussion training and a police background check. So why is it okay that I, as an eventing coach, can put kids who don't know anything about anything on a 1,000-pound animal and have them gallop at a solid object? Maybe there needs to be some sort of, training in place. And ideally, we would have built this incredible certification program that everybody wanted to be a part of in Canada, and then moved into licensing at a later date when everybody was already engaged in the program. And instead, it's sort of happening the opposite direction. People are really, they're out there doing it and they figured it out. And it doesn't mean that the coaches that are out there doing it aren't good coaches. It means that nobody knows. And if something happens, it's really hard to do anything about it. And, as Mike says, and maybe Mike can explain this better than I can, if something happens and you don't have these minimum standards, then how are you going to prove that you're really creating that environment, that you've made the effort as a coach to create that safe, welcoming environment for those athletes to start in? And Mike, I'll let you
listen, you're doing a perfect, no, Helen, you're doing it perfectly. And you've taken all my thunder. Thanks. We've been doing this too long together. We're like a married couple. You're finishing my sentences.
I know.
No, listen, to Helen's point, there's a couple of things that I often say in these meetings, whether they're in a big audience like this or in small audiences, and that is, this is not discipline specific from my perspective at all. To Helen's point, the vast majority, 90% of instruction activity occurs away from the competition ring. And probably 90% of what's left is not in an EC sanctioned event. So to Helen's point, EC is a national sport organization who does have to report to the minister. I mean, there is no Western representative that goes to the Minister of Sport. It's EC. And whether or not they represent the Western disciplines or the Western community as adequately as they do the English disciplines is not for today's discussion. But this status program is what EC was mandated to do, or this is their answer to the mandates that have been put up by the minister. But what I wanted to say was this: because these standards now exist, like as of January 1st, 2021, you're being judged against them, period. Because they're out in the community. Whether you're a Western discipline coach trainer, whether you're an English coach trainer, it doesn't make any difference. The reality is that a good claimant lawyer, and they are very good at this, is going to measure your practice, if there was a claim made against you, against this standard of being having some sort of status or some sort of credential that says that you are qualified or were qualified to be in that environment with the athlete, to have given them the instruction or the guidance that ultimately led to the claim coming forward, if that makes sense. So to Helen's point, we've talked about this for a very long time, but there needs to be more community engagement. And this forum is one of those ways that we're trying to broaden the discussion. We have to start small, guys. We have to take these small steps forward. But the idea is that over time and very soon, facilities across the country, whether they be Western, English, boarding, training, it doesn't really make any difference, will have heard the word, as it were, about what certification means and what credentialing means. Trainers are absolutely a part of this conversation. And the last thing I'll say is sort of a pair to what Helen said, and that is this. We talk about our industry in this broad scope of thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that participate in it every single day. But typically, it's one coach and one student. And that one relationship is the only relationship that student, that athlete might have with this whole industry. So it's critical for our industry in terms of survival that coach has the wherewithal, the training, and the demeanor to provide that safe environment. It's so critical. I can't stress that enough. But I repeat, you're being judged against it, whether you engage with this or not. So best to engage. Because frankly, being part of the conversation helps the whole thing move forward. Being outside of the conversation just creates a terribly acidic environment. So there you go.
Thanks to both of you. The next question is: the Making Ethical Decisions still free for instructors in training that have completed the old NCCP course, Instructor of Beginners, and is the PCSO allowed to enter those students into the locker?
Yeah, so if you ever did the old equestrian theory, or the EC NCCP Making Ethical Decisions, or the multi-sport Making Ethical Decisions, that should show up on your locker transcript, and that qualifies you to do the Making Ethical Decisions online evaluation for certification for free. Otherwise, it's $85. If it's not there, the PSO is allowed to enter those students in the locker as long as they did a sport-specific one. So the NCCP, the National Coach Certification Program through CAC, they do their own entries for multi-sport courses. But if you've done an EC NCCP version, so the equestrian version, then yes, they should be in the locker. And if they're not, they can be entered in the locker.
Perfect. Given all documentation submitted, how long is the process? Some of us have submitted all information, and it has been more than 2 weeks to hear about acceptance.
Yeah, and I hear you. It's supposed to be 4 to 5 days. I do know that there is a backlog, and I know that they're looking at completing the verifications for files that have all of the pieces submitted first to try and get through that backlog. I know staffing's a bit of an issue at EC, so I believe that's partly why they're taking a little longer to go through this as they get used to the process and all of the information that's being submitted. So yeah, it's taking a little bit longer. And if you are concerned that yours has been missed, email coaching@equestrian.ca and they should do something for you. They should get back to you. And I'm not there anymore, so I would love to help, but there's not really more than that I can offer.
When do the concussion and safe sport courses need to be completed? Was that the 90-day reference?
So they must be completed within 3 years of the day you apply. So if they fall out, like Mike said, if they fall out of completion, if they aren't valid in that 3-year window during part of your license or your registered status, then you will need to update them so that your license is still valid. So the 90 days is for you from buying the status. You'll go into a pending state and you have 90 days to upload all your pieces of paper and certificates and everything.
I think you touched on this a little bit, but why is there such a delay in certifying documents when all the exact same documentation has been supplied in previous years and thus verified by AEF and EC?
So a little bit I have touched on it, but also there was an EC decision to make sure that those documents, originals of those documents are being submitted for EC's own safety and to ensure that they're actually seeing documents. So they're requiring coaches to resubmit documents, even though AEF may have seen them in the past, to make sure they've got the most recent version of everything. It's really the first year that you're going to find there's all this documents to upload and pieces to do. Once you're started, that cycle should get a little simpler because you're just renewing a few pieces.
Great. And the next comment is from Darcy. Darcy, did you want us to unmute you for a moment so that you could clarify your questions and maybe have a moment to chat? So Darcy, I've just unmuted you. I'm not sure if you're able to adjust your volume.
So maybe read the question for Mike.
So she says, as for students that intend to become instructors or coaches, they're looking at $950 charge from Capri for insurance to get their initial certification as either registered or licensed, plus $199 application fee. Those students looking at it have now balked at the initial cost because they have even gone before they've even gone for coaching evaluation.
Mike, you're muted.
In my defense, I have no control of who's muting me or unmuting me, he said to the hosts that are not, there. Darcy, I want to be clear on what the question is. We treat uncertified coaches quite differently than we do certified coaches and always have, and that's unlikely to change. But Helen made a point in the very first of this presentation that there's an inherent difference between certification and having registered status. So I don't want to mix the two of them. At this point in time, we differentiate between those that are certified by either NCCP, CHA, and others, including the International Trainer's License, with those that are out in the community and have chosen not to certify or obtain a credential. We're involved in this program and have been for 25 years and have taken a very sort of conservative position, I suppose, to try and encourage people and incentivize people wherever we can to obtain a credential that provides them with professional status and a professional sort of education in their work. So I'm not sure about the student coaches. If the student coaches are working under the auspices of in a mentoring environment, then frankly, a coaching policy that we might issue, and I can only speak for us, would automatically include those folks as long as the assistant coaches are taking direction from their primary coach, the chief coach, and they're acting in a barn environment where the facility has a commercial liability policy. They don't have to buy their own policy in order to be covered. And I'm not sure if that answers the question, but there's a difference between certification and being this credential license. It's not the same.
I think she's asking if one of the requirements for the registered status is proof of insurance,
Mhm.
and they don't have insurance because they'd have to pay for uncertified coach insurance to then go get certified.
Okay, so, and I apologize if I'm being thick about this. So, in order for them to obtain the registered status, they need to provide proof of insurance, correct? Like we're on the same page there.
Yeah.
So I will say this quite publicly here, and I have in other presentations. I won't issue a policy to a 17-year-old, even though they can, in theory, have registered status with the EC as a minor, depending on the province of their residency. They have to be the age of majority. So if that person is wanting to acquire the coach credential from EC, then I'm unfortunately faced with the circumstance of them being not certified or being certified. Back to my earlier comments, they will pay a higher premium as an uncertified coach.
Great.
Thanks to both of you for answering that. Darcy jumped on the comments here and said, I'm talking about the current students that have taken their rider levels and are about to take their first coaching evaluation. So I think that answered her question, but Darcy, feel free to jump back on the chat if you needed anything else clarified. And the next question in the meantime, I just want to confirm that my standard first aid that shows on the transcript, that it will expire April 18th of this year is in fact valid until the end of the year, as I cannot attend in-person training.
Yeah, I can answer. So I actually, I did ask Douglas Duncan, who's the Director of Sport Development, and coaching falls under sport development, because this has been an issue for so many coaches across Canada, and I will provide AEF with a copy of all of these questions and answers afterwards as well. But so his official response was, in many provinces, first aid training has been deemed as an essential service and small classes are still being offered. Many national providers are also offered blended learning options for completing the standard and emergency first aid certificates. Based on the ever-changing nature of restrictions and access to programming due to the coronavirus pandemic, the following accommodations are being made by EC. Standard or emergency first aid training certificates that expired in 2020 will be accepted until December 31st, 2021 for both registered and licensed status. First aid training certificates that expired prior to January 1st, 2020 will be accepted so long as the applicant submits proof they've completed the online portion of a recertification or refresher course offered by a Canadian recognized first aid program. Recognized programs include those offered by the authorized delivery partners of the Canadian Red Cross, St. John Ambulance, the Life Saving Society, and the Canadian Ski Patrol. That's the answer that I got from Douglas. So what I would do is contact the provider. So what some national providers have done is actually extended certificates anyway, because they're not offering courses in your area, or because you're not able to attend because you haven't been vaccinated yet and you can't attend an in-person training. So contact the provider and see if they will extend your certificate. Most are extending them 6 months at least. And if not, if they have an online or a blended option that will allow you to extend your certificate a year. Otherwise, that statement is on the EC site in the coach status information as one of the frequently asked questions. So they are accepting first aid certificates that expired in 2020. So if yours hasn't expired yet, then you should be all right to apply for your coach status now.
The next question are what do I have to do slides available for download? I can actually answer that. We can make it available, and if you need any further clarification after today, you can contact Monica. She is the Sport and Recreation Manager with the AEF, and this whole presentation will actually be on our YouTube channel, and you can contact Monica at coaching@albertaequestrian.com, and she can clarify anything and send you any documents that you require. The next question is, what is the criteria for the reference letter?
Yeah, and that is on the top of the reference letter you can download from the campus. So when you go into your profile, look for the pathway for either the registered or licensed status. And when you look at one of the criteria that you have to upload is a reference letter, there'll be a forms button and you can download the form for it. I believe it's got to be an adult. It's got to be somebody who's seen you working. It can be a student. It doesn't have to be a student. There's a list of the people that you can use on that form. And you can find that pathway and find that form in the campus without registering. You can go through your MyEC account to the campus, even if you have a free MyEC account or you haven't renewed your MyEC. Or your EC Sport license for 2021, you can still go to the eCampus. You can still see all of the things in there. You'll just find that things like the EC training have a cost to them if you haven't renewed your membership yet. So you should be able to find that letter that you can download.
Perfect. Is there a letter format for ER nurse/standard first aid equivalency?
There isn't one that I have seen. I think your best bet is to email coaching@equestrian.ca and ask if they've created one. I was there until December last year, and there wasn't one when I was there, but I do know they've had several people ask about it. So I think you need one that, and it may be in the FAQs on the EC site, you need one from your employer verifying that you've done the training to deal with standard first aid emergency type issues like breaks and cuts and bruises and concussions and stuff.
So the current map is the only search tool for certification. No more pulling a list of everyone in each select discipline.
As far as I know, the current map is the only search tool, and that is only showing licensed or registered coaches.
This person is commenting, my NCCP are not entered. You said I could take a screenshot and enter it myself. Is that correct?
Yeah, if you go into your Locker account, there's actually, you can download a transcript of your Locker account as a PDF and upload that and submit it so that they can add those courses to your account. There is a connection being built from the campus to the Locker. I don't know if that connection is actually working yet or if it's being done manually. So there is a bit of time delay between when you do a course and when it shows in the Locker, or when you do something in the Locker and it shows in the campus. So if you're seeing things that are missing, you can go in and upload them. So when you look at your profile in the campus or your transcript, there's an opportunity to upload certifications or training records if you feel like training records are missing, or if you've got training records from non-EC NCCP that you want added to your account, so you can use them to prove other certifications. You can upload them in that profile as well.
Great, thank you so much. That actually completes all of the questions for today. There are just a few comments from a few different people who have said that they've taken various first aid courses during COVID and that the classes have been blended, mostly online or very well spaced. Just throwing that out there for everybody. And then Darcy was actually wondering if she can just hop on quickly to clarify her question for Mike. So I'll just try and see if we can unmute her here and bring her into the conversation. Darcy, are you there?
I think I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so here's the situation, Mike. I've got students that have taken their rider levels 1 to 4. And what's happening is as they're coming up to take their coach's evaluation, if they're having to come in as either the registered or the licensed coach, they're having to pay their insurance first. So I'm using Capri as the example because we've got you here, right? So when they did their applications, it's $300 for the base fee and a $650 surcharge if they aren't licensed already.
No.
So
No, stop there, Darcy. Stop there, Darcy. It's not about being licensed, it's about being certified.
Okay. Whatever way we're going to use the qualification, they don't have their coaches. They're still rider levels. They aren't assistant coaches. They are coming to me as a Western evaluator to get their Western level evaluation so they can go forward to become an instructor, right?
I understand. Yep. They're independent business people to you. They're not employees of yours.
No, they're not employees of me. I freelance doing the testing. I don't work on the barn, so I don't have anybody who's underneath me. So they're looking at the situation. So from my end as an evaluator, getting them ready to go forward, they're looking at the program and going full stop. We're paying $950 for the insurance, and then we're paying either the $50 or the $200 fee just to get on the EC website to get qualified to go forward, and then pay extra to take their evaluation. So this has kind of brought the program to a full stop. And is there some way we can get a workaround on this?
Well, I'll be frank with you, Darcy. At this juncture, we're in 2021, we're not specifically discounting or giving some benefit to the credential of status being achieved, as it came on long after we had adopted rating and so forth for 2021. So I'm in an environment where, again, Lloyd's of London, who's the carrier on this program, is determining rating based on the presence of a credential as being a premium assessment tool. So again, it's you're either certified or you're not. It's not, there's no in between. I appreciate that there's quite a disparity between that $300 charge and $950. And again, as I said earlier, it's intended to be incentive for folks to achieve their certification status. What we have done in the past, although it may not help these folks, is certainly through the course of the year, when certification is achieved, then they're welcome to contact me, and we'll provide some sort of a prorated credit for what's left in the calendar year, given the fact that they've achieved that credentials or that certification status. But again, Darcy, I don't want to mix up the license status or the registered status, this coach thing that we're talking about today, and certification, which is NCCP or others.
Yeah, I think the confusion is that you have to be registered before you can get certified now.
Well, so that's my next question then, is if they if they haven't applied for the registered or the licensed coach, are they able to go ahead and do their coach's testing for certification without one of those two applied for?
That's a Helen question.
So certification happens provincially, other than high performance coaching. So that would be up to the province. I guess my question the one thing I kept thinking when I was listening to this is those uncertified coaches that are mentoring or training that are going to get certification, are they not insured at all?
No, this is
like what happens if something happens when they're practicing? Because theoretically they must be teaching to get ready, right?
No, these are not coaches. These are rider level that have passed their rider levels and want to become instructors in the future. But they are looking at the cost going, this isn't worth the effort and the cost to put it forward to get the certification and maintain it. So these are the people who are interested in coaching who now have balked and said, we're not going to bother with the coaching program. This is where I'm afraid that we're killing the program just by making too many bars and hoops to jump through.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I see what you're saying.
Because
my concern would be if they're actually out coaching and not certified, then
they aren't coaching. They're students applying for the coaching. So this is where we're supposed to be feeding the pipeline and bringing them up into getting certified. And this is their first experience of getting certified. So they're going, yeah, I just don't want to do it, period.
And so they don't practice?
From an insurance perspective, I hope like heck that they're out there wherever they're teaching, whether they're registered or licensed or not, that they have insurance.
I think what Darcy's saying is they're not yet teaching, right? So they're going through their LTR levels. They have their LTR levels and they're moving into that next step. And because coach status makes them buy it first before they kind of continue to get their certification, I think that's where the confusion's coming from.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think those can sort of be done together, like as part of your getting certified, you're applying for the status. I don't see there being a big gap between doing the two, but I do know when you're preparing to get certified, you're still teaching a lot. So hopefully, so that you're practicing, and there should be some sort of coverage. And I know Wendy said hers are college students, so they're insured under the college. So maybe that's, something, Mike, that you can identify.
Again, if I'm issuing a policy to an individual, and again, as I said already, I've got an application that asks very specific questions about certification or not, and the rating is applicable. Whether they're applying for status with EC or not is not relevant to the current application. I can't imagine a circumstance where I would be willing, frankly, to offer a $300 premium to someone who has never taught before, but has proven themselves to be a proficient rider. That's just how I feel about it. The point in all of this is to provide some pathway for credential to be achieved. But until the credential is achieved, it's an educational process. And it's when that credential is achieved that they'll be recognized by the community. And that community ultimately includes CapriCMW. We'll help them as much as we can, but I can't imagine how I would evaluate their capacity as an instructor or as a coach through the process of their never having coached before and not having achieved some credential that would have given them the experience in order to obtain the lowest possible premiums that I have to offer. But Darcy, I'll be very candid with you, and as much as we insure probably more coaches than anybody in the country, I'm not the only provider. These are my rules, or the rules of CapriCMW and Lloyd's of London, who we represent. I can't speak for the other carriers.
I'm just going to jump on here. In the chat, someone else has commented, I guess if the potential coaches are not mentoring under a coach who has insurance, then they're learning about, in quotes, the cost of doing business. If potential coaches are not going to coach under a certified or licensed coach with insurance, they will have to insure themselves.
Yeah, we treat those folks very, very clearly in every jurisdiction. And this brings up a whole range of other conversations that aren't necessarily relevant to this presentation. I want to make sure we stay focused on what the topic is here. But we know certainly that there are coaches who are teaching at facilities, in theory, under the auspices of a head coach, who are taking instruction, as it were, from their head coach, who are making some determinations or assisting them in development of lesson plans and selection of animals and training programs and so forth for the students, and then going forth and doing those things on behalf of the facility or effectively on behalf of the head coach. Those folks are going to be insured under that broader policy. It's when they step out of that environment, interacting as independent professionals, independent business people, having a direct relationship with a student or a client, getting fee for service, or when they're being treated as contractors on facilities, which makes my head explode, where they're in theory independent, that they're responsible then to protect themselves. They're responsible then to acquire their own insurance. They will learn, and Darcy, to Darcy's point, regrettably, some young people see this as being somehow a free ride in horse sport. To be very frank, if they were doing this in any other sport, all of these things are required before they could even teach. So Helen made it very clear earlier that we're kind of doing this back-asswards, but fundamentally the objective is for the entire community to see a pathway that will be improved over time to bring these young people into the process so that they can be an active part of our community. Through that process, invariably insurers of all stripes, including us, will find ways to accommodate them to make it more affordable as only one expense in their business enterprise. We should not be the detriment. We don't want to be the deterrent for someone getting into the game. But fundamentally, we still have to assess the risk, and we have to charge accordingly. That's all I got.
Thanks so much to both of you. I know we're over time. Do you have we just have one last quick question about COVID. Someone just commented with COVID and liability, should coaches make sure parents are vaccinated when available? What if someone claims they got COVID in our barn? In the extreme case of a death claim, in other words, has the legality been tested yet?
Ooh, boy, you want to talk about COVID? Let's have a whole other presentation. We've only done 300 Zoom calls on COVID in the last year. So the short answer to your question is there are no insurers that I'm aware of in Canada or indeed around the world that are now providing coverage to business operators, whether they be a barn, a restaurant, or a retail business, for COVID-related claims. Most insurers, or certainly every insurer that I'm aware of, very early on, I'm talking about March, April at the latest last year, around the world, evaluated their own wordings to make sure the bodily injury claims included reference to communicable disease and how that was going to be treated in the event of an allegation being brought forward. And to be very frank, without exception in my world, and there's probably, I won't tell you how many insurers we do business with, without exception, all of them tightened their wordings to the point now where there is no coverage for COVID-related claims, period. So if someone makes an allegation against a coach, a barn, a facility, and says, you know, I can prove, or I'm going to take you to court because I contracted COVID-19 at your place of business, the insurance policy is not going to provide any defense. So whether it's tested or not, it hasn't been tested yet, to the best of my knowledge, not in any environment. I fully expect it will be in some environment. Maybe it'll be the horse industry, maybe it'll be a restaurant. I expect the restaurant might be the place where it will happen, or someone will challenge that they didn't do everything reasonable to protect the patron, which is why we have said repeatedly, until we're blue in the face, that we can't provide any assurance or any specific guidance about what the protocols are in your barn, in your business, that you must, by definition, rely upon the guidance of health authorities and government in your local jurisdiction, which is the only way to keep track of this stuff, and then do your very best to keep people safe when they come to the property. As for the vaccinations and what that protocol might look like in the future, who knows? Is it going to be a society where we walk around with a big star on our forehead so that we don't have to produce a document every time we walk into a store and get gas or enter into somebody's house? I don't know the answer to that, and I don't think anybody does. I think we're all waiting for the herd to become more widely vaccinated and these numbers to finally decrease to the place where we can all feel a little more safe when we leave our houses or leave our businesses in the day. But until then, I have no specific answer on that. I'm sorry.
Okay, great. And I know I'm just going to put this final chat message in regards to the previous comments about people getting certified. So the steps would be mentorship under a coach's insurance until the student has applied for and achieved coaching credentials, then apply for registration or license. The sequence is important.
Yeah. If they want to get the lowest rates, then that's clearly the process that will be followed. And listen, to be very frank, guys, we insure a lot of coaches who have not achieved any certification, who are successful businesses across the country, and have chosen for whatever reason not to embrace any credential particularly. And we're hopeful that over time they will also be converted, because again, the public awareness campaigns that are coming and are already sort of happening across the country will potentially embarrass them into actually proving that they have a credential, rather than just saying that they're 30 years in the business and they sure don't need anybody to tell them what to do. Frankly, that's not acceptable practice anymore, and nor should it be. So we're hopeful that the community will embrace this, and I'm confident they will over time.
Thanks so much for answering all those questions. Monica, I will turn it back to you.
Thanks, Mike and Helen and Ashley. Now this concludes our call today. If anybody has any additional questions for our speakers, feel free to field them to me. You can email me, coaching@albertaequestrian.com. And like I mentioned, a recording of this session will be available to you if you're interested. Again, email me, coaching@albertaequestrian.com. Thanks again for joining, and have a good rest of your day, folks.